Okay. You guys look like you're at a nightclub. So, I think Cleo wants to join. Cleo, come here, baby. Come here, baby girl. Come on, come on. Okay, this is Cleo. She's gonna be in to talk. All right. So, I thought of talking about the watcher state. And I think some people perceive the watcher state as such. It feels like there's some kind of remaining watcher in their experience after some spiritual investigation or some experiential insights. There can feel like there's this remaining sense of something holding back observing experience. And I think that certain practices actually kind of encourage that. I have a friend who's a Zen teacher, and she said once, don't build a better watcher. I'm not sure if you need to avoid that when you're doing various kinds of inquiry and so forth. It may just be a byproduct and something, it's a kind of a side effect that's going to happen, or it may not be. But certainly for some people, it's very obvious that this kind of watcher state seems to either form or be a remnant of the more loud internal mind identified state that calms down over time. But the way I'm going to speak about it today, I think it's always there to some degree until late stage of realization, until later stages of realization. And really it's just a functioning of consciousness. I do believe it's an underlying mechanism in consciousness that's required for us to live in that internal world. Go ahead. Changed her mind. That's required for us to live in that internal world of seeking, of managing or thinking we're managing our experience, daydreaming about the past and the future, contemplating ourself and our life. So I think that there's this fundamental movement in consciousness that underlies all of that. And it does become laid bare when we either have a sustained meditation, like a retreat, or we've done work, we've done inquiry work, and we calm the mind, clarify things, work through some vasanas, however you want to say that. And this watcher state remains, and it can be pretty sneaky. It can be kind of almost like insidious. A simple way of saying what it is it's a holding back from life. The most fundamental holding back from life is a inward recoil from the physical experience of aliveness, of physicality, of finding ourselves in a physical body in this world and recognizing that there's dangers here, that we could potentially come in contact with something that could harm us. And there's a very fundamental fear that goes along with that. And at a very young age, we learn to build identities over the top of that and never fully address that. So what I'm talking about with this watcher state, this recoil state, this holding back from life and almost an avoidance tone, that's consciousness version of that. It's it's the version of that physical recoil that can become propagated inside of consciousness, because consciousness is very good at this. Consciousness, the world of thought, is extremely flexible. It can dream up endless things to seek and then seek them. And then when it realizes it was not satisfied by that success or that whatever, it can easily dream up another one and say, well, that wasn't the right one. Let me seek something else, right? And it's very good at making images, creating images of ourselves, and then trying to live up to them or judge ourselves when we don't live up to them. It just has a lot of flexibility to it, consciousness. So it's kind of up for the job of this holding back from life, because it's actually very challenging to hold back from life in a certain sense. It's literally impossible when you see the non-dual nature of the sense world. It's actually not possible, and yet somehow we create a dream for ourselves, and we keep ourselves asleep in it somehow. It's amazing. It's like a magic trick, but it happens. So I think that the incredibly flexible nature of consciousness makes this possible. And I also think that very early on, probably certainly the underlying mechanism that makes this possible occurs around 1.5 years old, is the most fundamental sense of reflecting on the belief that I am, the recognition that I am something distinct from mom or from my primary caretaker, that from the world. I recognize myself as an individual. That most fundamental movement starts at 1 year old, and it becomes very complex very quickly. By the time you're about 3.5 to 4 years old, you already have theory of mind, which means you're aware of other people's internal world and you can manipulate them. A 4-year-old child knows that. He or she understands that another child or another person, they assume they actually have an internal world and they have internal perceptions of the world. And so the complexity of consciousness becomes pretty developed at a very young age. And in that, I start to identify in a more and more solid way with being a person, an individual that has a history, it has a past and a future, it has things it wants, things it likes, things it doesn't like, things it doesn't want, has certain qualities. And then it goes about the business of trying to manage what it perceives as its life out there, other people, relationships, success, work, all of it, health, spirituality. It's trying to manage all of that based on the information it believes about itself. But by the time this is happening, that watcher state is already in full function. And it's behind the scenes. It's running behind the scenes. You can't see it. You don't know it's there, but it's already there. Probably all of us have experienced this at some point where in our life, like maybe in late teens or early adulthood, where you all of a sudden say, like you start to feel the grip of thought, of belief about yourself as like, almost like it's imprisoning. You know, I'm not sure everybody experiences this, but certainly people in spirituality tend to, because that's why we're here, or at least that's why most people are here, because of the suffering, the incessant binding of thought, right, about ourselves, and whatever it is, however that manifests in you, it can become extremely uncomfortable. But we find ourselves in that, and we kind of go like, how did we get here? How did I get here? And then you try to figure out like, what did I do to cause this, or how do I undo this, right? But by that time, you're already completely bound into it. The belief that you have control is three levels of identity beyond even seeing that there's a watcher state, right? So the roots of this are planted very young in life. The roots of this binding of suffering are planted very, very young, at a very young age. And this is just normal. There's nothing wrong. This isn't a moralistic statement. This is just the way our nervous systems function, right? So when we start to undo this, when we start to pull the curtain back, we start to look under the hood with spiritual practice, with meditation, especially sustained meditation or intense inquiry, or exposing ourselves to someone who can start to disentangle our identities, then things can get weird, right? We've all been through this. Like, things can get really weird. You start to not realize, like, well, who am I then? What's really underneath if those beliefs I have about myself aren't real? If the images I have of the past and the future, those are only thoughts right now. Well, what the heck is it that's experiencing those thoughts, right? When you really start to investigate this way, it can be very strange, very unsettling, right? In some sense, you're actually going directly back to those primal fears, those very visceral developmental fears, right? The childhood fears of the fear of not having the ability to survive, right? The fear of being abandoned. These really primal, fundamental fears that we have many identities operating all the time to prevent us from actually coming in contact with. Well, when you really start asking, when you really start looking into this, you can come directly in contact with those, right? So when we start to work through this, when we start to get real, right? Start asking the real questions, and then be willing to go where they actually lead, right? Then we can come up against some things that are very unsettling. What's interesting though is until an awakening, or until a very real shift in identity, we'll always come in contact with those and try to manage them from the state of that watcher, that manager, the one who thinks it's going through this process, who thinks it's in control of this whole process, who thinks it's actually standing apart from reality, from the world, and trying to navigate it in a certain way to whatever it thinks is going to happen. Even awakening will be co-opted in this way. It'll think, oh, awakening is something I'm going to get so that I feel better, get what I want, whatever, get the peace I'm looking for, relax, stop suffering, all that. And it is about that, yet it's not about that in the way that the seeker, the watcher, the one who perceives itself to be separate is going to imagine it. Okay, so really, until that shift, until a significant shift in identity, that one that feels threatened, the one that feels like it has to survive, has to organize life a certain way to make me feel better, who actually is, if we're really honest, is always kind of in survival mode one way or another. The feeling of that will kind of be there in one form or another, attached to that watcher state, until that realization starts to really flower. And the first step of that would be what I call awakening, typically. Now, when that happens, the watcher state doesn't just disappear, although it actually kind of does for a while. That first period, the honeymoon period, can be so integrated and so clear and really even non-dual. But as my Zen teacher said years ago, the ego does not take this lying down. It's not gone. It's just off in the periphery, but it's coming back, and it's going to come back with fire. We can talk about how that plays out, but the point is, we've really seen behind the curtain now. We looked behind the curtain and saw that there's no wizard. There's no manager in life. There's no one who's always here that doesn't know who it is, but it's always trying to find some sort of identity and secure itself, and then always at odds with the world out there. Like, that whole construct, that subject-object construct of the struggling, suffering self, does take a hit. Like, it's never quite seen the same way again. It's now seen much more to be a thought, and we also have access now to that realm of thought and self and the world, and it's called consciousness. Now, we may not call it consciousness, depending on what system of spirituality we grew up in, or how this played out for us, or who we've talked to. But I'm just going to call it consciousness, and it's just that internal realm of reflection that makes it possible for us to have an experience at all, right? To have a personal experience, to have an experience of the world, to think, to imagine, to remember, to project a future. All of that world of thought, that reflective world, that is now seen and experienced to be sort of infinite, right? many people will actually perceive this as consciousness is everything. Now they'll actually believe the universe is made out of consciousness. This is kind of like a supreme ego almost, in a way, to perceive it that way, but it does feel like that because everything you can think about the universe has always been consciousness. Every image you can make of it as a you will always be made out of consciousness, right? So all of a sudden, when your internal world is seen to be, oh wow, I am completely integrated with all of it. There's no separation from me, the one who was experiencing life as an object. I can see it is actually the same thing. The stuff that the world is made out of, the every thought about the past and the future and about me and about my lover and about everything is made out of this stuff, and I'm also made out of it. I've never been apart from all of that. And this shift is well, first of all, it's a huge paradigm shifter, but it's a big freeing event. It frees up so much energy. It makes it much harder for us to hide from ourselves, to lie to ourselves. And it's a very enjoyable time for a while. Like I said, there's a honeymoon state to this and so forth, a honeymoon period. Now, when this happens, as I said, like the ego, although it's now definitely changed in form, it's still there, and we experience it very differently. The struggle after awakening is a very different kind of. There's a very different set of challenges that come into play. But what I want to point out, because I started talking about the watcher state, is that what is still left, what allows that ego to come back, is that watcher state. It's the ability, I shouldn't even say the ability, I should say the tendency to move back into self, let's call it, okay, the really fundamental structure of self, to be able to move back into this, I'm just going to use the term awareness, okay, and to become aware as a subject to an object called anything else, which can be thought, emotion, the world, a sensation. And so what happens often, and actually usually, but not always, after awakening for a period, is that when we've kind of sorted out a lot of those, or at least the roots of a lot of the neuroses about who I am in the thought world and all that, because we kind of feel now and see and experience that it's all sort of consciousness. There's much more space now. Life is much freer. It's much more peaceful, and we actually have access to that consciousness as a sort of meditative experience pretty easily. So a lot of times we want to just sit in that for a long time, and that's fine. But over time, I think what happens is having dealt with that initial distortion in consciousness of constantly trying to hold a subject-object experience, always struggling with everything all the time, struggling with our own thoughts, when we've kind of dissolved that problem, then the next stop that we can come in contact with that has to do with the distortions that hold us back from life is really the emotion body. It's those much more fundamental visceral experiences of, again, like the fear of death, fear of helplessness, fear of abandonment, fear of intimacy, these really deep-seated, fundamental, physiologic experiences that we've held back from. And we started doing this very young in life. So that's the next stop. That's what we come in contact with after. And so when that happens, that's kind of like a whole new order of oh God, this is where this goes. Like I didn't know awakening was going to happen. This was going to lead to this, right? And it can be, it's an interesting time. It can be confusing and disorienting. It can also be very peaceful in a lot of ways. And it's kind of like all of your vasanas, all of your complexes, your fixation points, your emotionally repressed areas, they all just come to the surface sooner or later. And some of them were kind of open to, and what we welcome them, and we can work with them, and it feels good to dissolve them. But some of them, for various reasons, and it's really just conditioning stuff. It's maybe karmic, but it's a lot of our life experience. Some of them we don't want to see. We really don't want to. We don't want, and we tend to form our view around avoiding certain things, certain emotions. To be specific, like I find some people really don't want to feel sadness, grief, loss. That's just a very, very triggering thing for some people. Other people don't have a problem with that as much. It's more like anger. They really get triggered by anger. They don't, they've learned to build an identity around never being angry or repressing anger at all costs or whatever, right? And shame is a big one for almost everyone. So these emotional points of fixation or repression patterns become they become where the spiritual journey kind of goes, and where it has to play out. And this part can be tricky, and it's really helpful to expose yourself to somebody who can help you see it, that you trust. Not someone who's just gonna want to like dharma joust with you or constantly point out conditioning for fun or something, but someone you really trust, who really moves from compassion, who really has nothing more at heart than your own awakening. A good teacher, whatever. But or circling groups, things like that. But something to keep you honest, because you can really hide this stuff because you don't want to see it. Of course, you don't want to see it. And the other side of the repression pattern, the other side of that emotional repression pattern will be an identity, right? An identity meaning a set of behaviors, a set of patterns of who we interact with and how we interact with them, right? We'll keep that intact so that we never have to look behind it and see, okay, well, what's running the show back here? What is it I don't want to see, right? This is that uncomfortable place. This is shadow work. But in my experience, you have to do it. I don't know, there's not really a way around this. There are people I've met who I think maybe they had such clean karma. I don't know, maybe they've done this so many lifetimes in a row that it was easy this lifetime, but that's very rare. Most people, this is tough stuff to go through. You go from feeling enlightened after awakening to worse than you ever did, in a way. Not worse, but more disarmed, more raw, more like, I just can't hide anything from myself anymore. I can't fake it. I can't lie to myself. I can't conveniently ignore the things that I didn't want to feel when I was a teenager and a young adult, and right, it just all comes back. It all comes up. And you see, the nice thing about this is you see also that it's never gone anywhere. I mean, it's not new stuff. This has always been there. It's been there. It's been running the show. It's been helping us to go unconscious at certain times, and so it's already here. We're just picking up the layers on the surface and getting underneath and saying, okay, what's really here? What do I really need to feel? What do I really? What have I been avoiding feeling? And some I would say some intense, particularly intense, but generally short-lived experiences come that I would call like existential crisis. Existential terror can come. These moments of, well, if I let go of that identity, who am I, right? Like, what's left? Like, it's this void of like, I don't know. And that's not the void of Buddhism. That's not emptiness and shunyata. It's fear is what that is. When you experience that, and it makes sense. Like, we have a fear of the unknown. It's natural. It's a survival instinct, and that's okay. But we'll go through that at some point or another. It can happen at any time. It can happen. It's not too uncommon during sustained meditation situations. If you sit and meditate multiple hours a day for a few days, you're going to come in contact with some weird stuff often. But again, if you have a good teacher or somebody to just kind of ground you, help you ground yourself into the senses, talk you through it, it's fine. It's typically short-lived stuff, and there's always more freedom on the other side. But yeah, so we can go through all of this, and still this subtle, very subtle sense of a watcher state can be intact. And it may not be intact it may not be there all the time. It can be kind of situational, can be convenient based on how we're feeling, whether we feel triggered, etc. And then come into play. But it's kind of like it has different aspects, maybe I would say. It's kind of like a manager sometimes. It's kind of like I need to manage my life, right? Feels like that. Other times it's kind of like a monitor. It's like monitoring your state all the time. How am I doing? How are things going? What do I need to do to make myself feel better? Like what, you know, and each one of these, you know, if you feel into them, makes sense. Of course, you should monitor how you're doing, right? Shouldn't you? Shouldn't you monitor how the body's doing? Like, shouldn't you pay attention and make sure, you know, I'm doing okay, right? You know, I'm healthy. I'm making good choices. You know, I'm feeling a little pain here. I probably should do something about that, right? These make sense. These ways of experiencing our moment-to-moment internal experience, of course. So these aspects of that watcher, that sense of holding back, monitoring, managing, they make perfect sense in their own regard, in their own right, in their own language. And there's nothing, I'm not suggesting there's anything wrong with them, nor am I suggesting anyone should try to get rid of them. That's not where we're at here. You can kind of like muscle your way through a first awakening. Like you can do the Renzai Zen thing and just, you know, pound away at mu and have that first shift, that first awakening. But this kind of stuff is different. This isn't about force. This isn't about throwing anything out. You have to be gentle here and move with acceptance, move with a willingness to integrate, a willingness to feel into and understand the view of these. So these energies are life forces. They're protective life forces, actually. The monitor, the one that wants to take care of itself, right? That makes sense. It's not a mistake. So when we come in contact with these watcher states, with these aspects of the watcher, it's important to be compassionate and understand they formed at a time in our life when we were extremely vulnerable, almost helpless, really. We required our parent, our caretaker, to take care of almost all of our needs at some point, right? And that's the time during which these states, these watcher states, formed. So it's important to have compassion here, to have a lot of understanding, and not go in with the idea of like, that shouldn't be here. Let's take out the trash. You know, like the neti thing, like I'm not this, I'm not that, can be a very subtractive type of practice. That's not the kind of thing you want to do here, right? Because that just puts you more in a watcher state anyway. But it's more like understanding. It's more like contact. It's more like integration, love, compassion, okay, for these parts of ourselves. And what's interesting is these will feel often very personal, right? It's an intimate place inside you. But strangely, the more we go down into the fundamental aspects of our personality, of our identity, the more we actually share this exactly with everybody, with all other humans. It's kind of a paradox. That part doesn't really matter. I just find it interesting, but it is true, because when you really get down to this, these are these emotional landscapes are very much I don't know the word I'm looking for, but they're very similar person to person. They're not something that some people have and some people don't, or I wouldn't even say they're experienced that differently. They're quite similar. And so what's interesting is even though we tend to avoid this part of ourselves most of the time or most of our lives, if we're able to actually come in contact with them in an intelligent, compassionate way, approaching them with curiosity and innocence, then we're actually coming very close to that contact that we crave, that human contact, that deep, authentic human connection that we crave. And we find it here. We find it inside ourselves. And really, this is a wonderful thing. This is when we start to recognize that the tendency to avoid, the tendency to hide, isn't actually saying something about the part of us we're avoiding. It's not saying something about the part of us we're hiding from. It's actually not saying anything about anything. But by experiencing that avoidance at these fundamental levels and creating characters, personalities, personas on top of it to avoid them, it really sends the message again and again that there's something here to be avoided. There's something here I really don't want to come in contact with. But however it happens, when you actually come in contact with it, when you come in contact with these very unguarded, tender life energies, you realize all that avoidance was for nothing. It just didn't it didn't really have a purpose or a function. It wasn't necessary. There's nothing here to fear. There's nothing inside shame to fear in the experience of it. There's nothing inside the experience of regret. In the experience of it, there's nothing to fear. In the experience of helplessness, surrender, at the core of that life energy, which is older than you and it's older than all of us, there is nothing to fear there. In fact, it's quite enjoyable in a certain way. It feels sublime. It feels real, finally. It feels ancient. This is the realness we crave. So we don't need to dissolve a watcher state. We just need to get curious about what creates it or what is intertwined with it at the core of our emotion body. We approach this with innocence and genuine curiosity. Not curiosity that is important in the human paradigm. You're not going to find a lot of validation for what I'm talking about on Facebook or in the media or on TV or in a movie, although you can see pointers here and there. This you have to give yourself permission to do. You have to give yourself permission to, in some sense, it could be considered self-centered, right? Or selfish, but you have to give yourself permission to go all the way to the core of what you are. And just literally come in contact with it. Not make a story about it, not try to heal something, not try to understand it, not try to use it to make my realization go to some other level someone talked about that described it and sounded cool. None of that stuff. This is about contact. Seeing where you've never been out of contact. You could never be out of contact. Feeling it, experiencing it directly, letting the stories just fall to the floor. There's no story here. There's no narrative here. This is about aliveness. This is about what's made it possible for you to be a human being in the first place, to have a physical body. You can only know it by experiencing it. You Can't know it by thinking about it, talking about it, communicating it to other people or yourself. It's direct. It's there for you all the time. And by being willing to come in contact with it more than once, you will start to know from the inside what non-dual means, what no subject object in experience itself means. There's only experience. There is only vivid experience. And it starts in the body. It starts with the body. It starts with getting through those emotion blocks and resistance patterns by, again, acceptance, not trying to throw out the trash, but getting to the core of them and keep moving through until you're there. That's when the watcher state starts to collapse. And you realize even that's not a problem. I didn't need the watcher state to collapse. It didn't matter. It never mattered. What I wanted to do was feel. I wanted to experience. And once you know it in the body, you know it in sound, non-dual, not two, just that sound right now. And you see it in the visual field. There's not someone here looking out there seeing a visual world. There's just the visual world. There's seeing that sees. Images imaging. Colors coloring. Movement moving. But you'll never know that beyond a conceptual paradigm until you come in contact with it in your body, in the sense world, in the physical sense of being alive. And that, generally speaking, requires us to go down through that emotional cascade. Then you'll realize all that stuff you read about realization doesn't even matter. Because you know living truth. Palpably, physically. You don't need to talk about it. You might write about it. You might make some stages of awakening stuff about it. Or you may never talk about it at all, but it doesn't even matter. It's the contact that matters, right? Recognizing there's nothing that's been out of contact, nor could there be. You might write poems about it or music about it, or you may never need to express that way. But the contact is there. You realize all of those seeking patterns we had, trying to get this and that, trying to get my lover to understand me, trying to find the perfect partner, trying to get validation, trying to get security, all those seeking patterns, which are fine in their own right. They have a place in the practical world of being a human. But they were all trying to find, really, what they're really trying to do was trying to find this, right? This contact. So when you move from that contact now, when you don't even need an identity because it's just contact, then all of those concerns will relax. You'll do what you need to do for security when in the moment when it's reasonable, when it makes sense, when it is natural. You'll say the right thing to your partner when it's natural and relevant, and then you'll forget about it. You won't obsess about anything, right? You'll be in love with being alive, in love with this contact, with intimacy. And everything just falls into place just the way it needs to, or it doesn't, and it doesn't actually matter. That's the beauty of it. That's freedom. That's peace. Question? Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you.
I was just finished with the talk anyway, so the timing was perfect.
So I really resonate with what you're pointing to, especially with this uncovering of the emotion body. My question is, you kind of described that process as a way to, further wake up to being alive after like a initial awakening experience. So my question is, obviously there's psychological benefit of doing this emotional pain body work even before that initial awakening. But is there any, here's my fear coming up. Is there like any chance of reifying or creating more identity through that psychological work if I haven't already experienced initial awakening?
Gotcha. I usually recommend doing kind of both simultaneously. Like there's a value to both sides. You can, I've seen it happen where you can learn a lot about emotion work and investigating your emotions and talking to other people about them and it not being fully authentic. And then you can really build an identity around the one who does that and knows that, because not only do I know it in me, now I know it in you, and I can use it to manipulate you and all this. It can get really toxic, right? So the ego can co-opt anything, including everything I just talked about. So I like I like to not approach things in a singular way, I guess. I've used this quote probably here before. I put it in the book that I'm writing, but one of my favorite quotes my teacher ever said was, he said, really what all of this is about, and he was a Zen teacher, so he talked about stages of realization and things like that. But he said, what this is really all about in the end is living out of the innermost promptings of your tender and loving heart. He said, but without awakening, you will think you're living out of the innermost promptings of your tender and loving heart, and you will be living out of the outermost promptings of your deluded ego. Okay? So you kind of have to do both, I think. You really do. And here's the beautiful part. Here's the part I love about answering this question and just looking at you and listening to that's come out of you is the beauty of this is you have to figure out the right balance of them. I can't figure that out for you. You know, I can tell you how it was for me or whatever. And I can point you in this way and that way and work with somebody individually. But ultimately what I love is people wake themselves up. They figure out how to do it. Your commitment at the level of heart to awakening, to realization, is what drives the whole thing. It really, really is. It's not the right technique necessarily, although they can be helpful. It's not the right teacher, although a good teacher can be really helpful. Ultimately, you really don't need any of that. It's really the commitment at the level of heart that says, I want to know what living truth is. I want to know what's this realization thing that the people I've heard talk about it who I really resonate with, that I think they actually know what they're talking about. I think that's possible for me. I want to move that way. And I'm willing, here's the important part, and I'm willing to let go of my beliefs that might be limiting me from experiencing that. I'm also willing to be uncomfortable. If you're willing to do those three things, you're good. It's fine. Just a matter of time. Just don't give up. And give up means don't get super distracted with a lot of other things. That's what mostly happens with people is just distraction. But yeah, I think that side of things, that surrender side, that willingness to let go is really important. You know, because there is going to be a lot of letting go as well. Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, you'll find the balance, of course. Yeah, you'll find the balance and you'll intuit the balance. And the beautiful, and the reason I love it is because when I talk to you 2 years from now or whatever it is, then I'm gonna see that expression and how it came forth. I can already see it coming forth actually right now, to be honest. But I'll see how it came forth and how that played out for you, and then you'll express that in a certain way. It might be through poetry or through just what you've recognized in yourself or whatever what your reflections are on it. But every individual human, that individuality is so beautiful because it will express this in a very different way. My favorite teachers, like there's a handful of teachers that I love so much, and they all express so differently. Adyashanti, Lisa Carnes, Paul Hederman. There couldn't be different personalities in the way they express if you watch one of their videos, and yet what comes through when I listen to them is exactly the same thing. It's not unclear. It's extremely clear, and strangely, it's what's not there that speaks so loudly. But but what's not there, and that brilliance of natural display that feels so real and so vibrant and so authentic are not two things. So yeah, good question.
Angelo, I have a follow-up on what you said about the importance of the commitment at the level of heart. It's really driving things. And I have a certain amount of that, but what I've come up against in the past few days is realizing how much that's become an emotional and mental attachment to the idea of awakening. And I really feel that that's an obstacle for me right now. Could you speak to that issue and coming out of getting attached to this idea and just coming back to the pure movement towards that without creating an idea about it or an emotional attachment, which very much is on it as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I want to tell a little story about. Well, I'll make it very anonymous. There's a tendency some people have about spirituality to read everything that they can find about it and to learn everything about it, learn like all the aspects of it, all the late stage awakening type stuff. I'm not saying you're that person either, by the way. You have a lot of knowledge, but you're also very heart-based. But it's definitely something that happens, especially at the beginning of the process of spirituality. Like, they know all the stages, they know all the most advanced teachings, and they also know it from different schools. And then they kind of talk about, well, which school do I want to go with? Which path do I want to use? And it's very intellectual, okay? And I've interacted with people like this. What I always really try to point to with them, and it's tricky, but I try, is like, there's nothing wrong with knowledge. There's just nothing wrong with understanding knowledge. All of that's fine. But it's really important that you recognize that none of that knowledge is going to get you where I'm pointing. It doesn't matter how much you have. It doesn't matter how much you understand it, how much you visualize it in your mind, or whatever you think the path is, like understanding the path, like the obsession with that, the path of things, the way you do it of things, that itself, I try to point to them. It's not that that's preventing awakening, because in a sense, awakening can't be prevented. What it's actually doing, though, is you're kind of using it to avoid seeing something. And it's actually avoid feeling something more, is more of an attunement to this. But so I'm always trying to point that, like, I know it feels like that's how you're going to get there, by thinking about it, by understanding it, by not forgetting it. Like, I don't want to forget about this, because then if I forget about it, somehow I won't get to it, But the weird thing is, as these letting go events occur, it's when you do forget about it. It's when you literally like give up for a second. You just realize, like, no amount of thinking, understanding, having a mental image of it, having a belief about an event, none of that ever is going to get me here, right? Because I'm already here. This is that real paradoxical thing. Like, understanding an event called awakening can't get you to here, because that's never here. It's never here, right? So there's this spell that the mind puts on us, and some of us more than others. Some of us, it's a very strong spell. I tend to be that way myself. Like, I was very, very intellectual, and I kind of knew that the intellectual movement somehow, I didn't think it was wrong in and of itself, and I still don't, but that the tendency to use it in a certain way to avoid emotion, or avoid something, I didn't know what it was. I could feel that was dysfunctional or something. So I get it and I understand it, and I think everyone does this to some degree, and at certain times it'll come. But with the answer really to your question, that's just background. The answer to your question, I think, is life. The actual day-to-day life stuff that happens, and surrendering to it. Just saying yes to life, just going, whatever happens, the person I meet, if I feel a connection, I want to, like, I want to embrace that. I want to say, okay, well, life put this here. I don't know why. I don't understand. I don't know, but I want to move that way. Here's an opportunity that just came and I don't understand it. Normally I would say no, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, life had brought it to me, so let's just explore that. Maybe it'll put me in a situation where it exposes me to my own emotion body in a way that I wasn't able to do when I was living that other way, whatever that is. Like letting it's a physical thing. It's a physical thing. It's a visceral thing. You don't have to try to stop yourself from having an image in the mind of awakening or something like that. Because it's just there, it's just a thought. But more like, what else can I open myself to? What else? Maybe slightly or subtly, you could say, like, where am I subtly saying no to life that I could like open a little more to? It's kind of it's like the down and dirty side of things, the messy side of things, maybe, right? There's another thing about intellect, about understanding and precision of stages and descriptions about spirituality and all that stuff. There's a little bit of a fixation that can be around that about like precision, right? This is a masculine distortion, okay? Life is also messy. Yeah, life is also imprecise. It is, the precision's great, but also the imprecise of life, the messiness of life, that has an intelligence that the incisive and extremely logical mind will never understand. It can't understand that intelligence because it's designed to avoid it. It doesn't like what's messy. It doesn't like what it can't understand. It doesn't like what it can't put together in a formula or a paradigm or a map, right? And I don't just mean this in spirituality, I mean this in everything. And yet there's this other side of things that life can just present a situation to you that's like, shit, this is my whole life now, and I never expected it to be my life at all. And yet here I am thrust into this whole other experience, and the emotions of it are crazy, and I wasn't expecting it now, and I wasn't, you know, I wanted this to happen, but I wanted it to happen later when I was prepared, and now I'm not prepared, but here it is. Like that kind of thing, like the day-to-day stuff of life, letting life come forward and claim you in a way. That's the other side to that, in my opinion. It's the serendipity, it's the messiness, it's the happenstance, it's the muddiness. It's really surrender in a lot of ways, and humility, humiliation. Yeah, does that make sense? I had to give a very illogical answer to such a logical guy.
Oh, I assume there was a certain logic to that. Would you have anything else to say about not the intellectual conceptualization, attachment to the conceptualization, but the emotional attachment, like this really like this sense in the heart that it's like, I want to awaken, but it's like very much projecting it into the future. Like there's this thing outside of me that I really want. And I'm also seeing that that's blocking me because it is attaching emotional energy to something else other than this.
You know, that's a really interesting thing you just asked, because I noticed this with myself over time. Okay, the ego is a trickster. The ego it definitely has this trickster aspect to it, the ego movement, let's say. I remember for a long time, I would, how can I say this? I would experience things that were like emotional in nature, not emotional like a distinct emotion, but basically interconnection. I would experience something that I could feel in my body that was genuine interconnection. That was quite enjoyable actually in the moment. And then immediately my mind would say this weird thing, and it would say, oh, well, hopefully you can get that in the future. And I believed it. It was really weird. Like I don't even know how I talked myself out of the fact that the only time I could have experienced that was right then. But the mind kind of basically pulled me away from it, is what it did. It pulled me away from it and said, okay, well, let's find out a way to seek that. That's how freaking crazy the mind is, but it will totally trick us into doing that. I'm not even joking. Like, as stupid as that sounds, like that's how our mind does, because it makes an image and it goes, oh, okay, well, and it does something that makes sense in the moment. It'll say, well, let's design your life so we can get more of this, or something, like whatever it is. But the point is, the fact that thought comes, that's the watcher state. The watcher state is what that thought rides on. The watcher state pulls back, and it's like, it doesn't tell you the truth. The truth is, oh my God, I'm feeling good. That's terrible. Let's stop doing that right now. I need to go into my mind. That is crazy, because that doesn't make sense, right? The mind can't tell you that. But so it tells you something that does make sense to you. But the truth of it is, people aren't just afraid to feel pain. They're not just afraid to feel shame and sadness. They're afraid to feel pleasure, actually. They're afraid to feel ecstasy. They're afraid of the whole spectrum of emotion. And there's a very simple reason. Because when emotion takes over, when you go from whatever you're doing in the moment and feeling relaxed to being completely sexually charged and aroused because of the situation, the mind is like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I don't like this because all of a sudden I'm not there, right? It knows. The ego literally just goes offline. When the body becomes sexually charged, for instance, when the emotion just takes over the body and the behaviors, the physical experiences and all that are so prominent and alive, the ego's gone in a way, right? Similar with fear, similar to all kinds of emotions, right? Empathy even, right? Even empathy, like feeling the pain of another person. It's like, no, I don't have time for that, right? So that's it. Doesn't matter whether the ego has time or not. It's like if the body is actually going to feel that and we allow the body to feel that, then the watcher state, the ego, the thinking in the background just goes away, quiets down, right? So it's in some sense, it's just about recognizing that if the feeling's here, if the feeling at the level of heart of like the love, you do, I mean, I know you well, you have a profound love for truth, for realization, like, and there's nothing wrong about it at all, not in the least, and you don't need to cultivate it, and it's not about something in the future, and you already know this. It's about right now. It's always about right now. So when it's there, that's great. Just feel it, just be with it, just enjoy, but also be willing to let it go, because it's also somewhat of an emotion too, and emotions change and fluctuate as well. But recognize it's never about something else. It's just about dropping right into it right then when it's there and honoring it for it, and honoring the preciousness of the fact that it's a life form that's going to come and go like every life form. It's going to have a birth. It's going to have a time when it's prominent, and it's going to have a time when it dissolves. And we don't like any of that, right? The ego doesn't like any of those parts. It doesn't like not knowing when it's going to come. It doesn't like knowing it's going to be super intense and take over everything. And it also doesn't like when it's going to go, right? These are the ego wants to like normalize everything into some internal mind stuff that has nothing to do with emotion. So it can't actually do that. All it can do is constantly distract attention. And it does it with time. It always puts it in the future and past, right? Does that make sense? Rapid fire answer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Like when I talk to you, I feel that commitment, that heart level commitment. But I know I can't feel that in the future, and I can't feel it in the past. I can only feel it right now. So that's what's here right now. It's great. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. But I'm not holding on to it. It'll go away. Everything goes away. Chad, sorry, buddy. This one started at 11, and then the rest of them start at noon. The next 3 start at noon, just so you know. But does anyone else have a question?
Say something more about the tendency for like I don't remember like the word, but it was like perfectionism or
Precision.
like yeah.
I think what I perceive when I'm talking about this stuff, this spirituality stuff, or when I'm talking about awakening, or when I'm working with somebody, or just talking to somebody about their own awakening process or whatever, it's very simple. I don't have like a map for how things are supposed to go or going to go or anything like that. It's not like that. It's instinctual. But what I can say is I think what I perceive is I perceive fixations. I perceive when somebody's coming from a place where they're constructing an identity in a fixated way. And I can just feel it. I don't know why I can feel it. I can feel it. So so that's what I usually address with someone. That's what I just feel. It's very simple because they'll be talking to me and going, yeah, you know, blah, 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 awakening, whatever we talk about. And then the way they talk about it, I can feel they're coming from a place, they're coming from a fixation point. And then really I just talk to them about it and we investigate that fixation point and it relaxes. That's it, right? And so there are a finite number of fixation points, I guess, although they have shades of severity or intensity, I guess, and they also can be mixed with one another and so forth. But it can simplify by saying there's very fundamental fixations in the masculine and feminine. If you don't like the terms masculine and feminine, I can say in the disintegrative and integrative aspect of reality, okay? But those are very fundamental. They're not about man and woman. They're not about human gender. Everybody has both of them. Everyone has distortions in both of them at various levels, and they interact in various ways. But that's a very fundamental description of fixation. People also have fixations in things that are very human, right? We have fixation in the way we look. We have fixation in how much money we have. We have fixations and identities around how smart we are. So human qualities. And then ones that are common to everyone. And for some people, a certain one will express very intensely. So security, we have fixations in wanting security. And again, security in and of itself, of course, makes sense and it's situationally relevant. It's not you have to like get rid of the desire to feel secure or anything, but it's more about investigating the identity that's built around the fear of not having security. That's what we're talking about, okay? So security, validation, we all have all of these to some degree. We all can experience all of them. Security, validation, anything about romantic partner, so intimacy, stuff like that, sex stuff, fear of the body, fear of vulnerability of the body, obsession with eating certain ways, certain things, obsession with health all the time. There can be some like, paranoia stuff that can come up, like obsession with fear of the government and all these things. There are a lot of ways people can fixate. So the one we're talking about, or the one that to answer this question is a fixation in intelligence, partially. And there's a lot of subcategories to that or sub aspects to it, but it makes sense that at least the first stop in this process is at least largely undoing our fixation in thought, right? Recognizing I am not a thought. The world isn't a thought. It's all made out of thought. Stuff is consciousness. Like that's a shift that can happen. And yet our attachment to intellect and understanding and precision and etc. can go way beyond that, for sure. It can go way, way beyond an awakening. It can hang out for a long time. Precision specifically is kind of an obsession with details, right? If I know all the details, if I know all of the precision of anything, then I know it well, right? Then I understand it well. I can know its nature by dissecting it, knowing every aspect of it, knowing what it looks like, being able to describe it better than anyone else describes it. Yeah, I can know. It's an obsession with a certain modality of knowledge. Okay, and it's fine. There's a truth to that. I'm a physician. I'm an anesthesiologist. I love precision when I'm at work with dosing medications, with all that stuff. Like I love it. An organization like makes sense totally. I love to learn. I like to have relative knowledge, and that's all fine. Now, when you have identity tied into that, then it's really important to recognize or be willing to ask, what am I? If I'm fixating in that way, basically, if you're applying any of that to spirituality, no, I mean, there's nothing precise about this. This is not precise and it's not imprecise. The moment you put your finger on it, it's gone. How can you describe that, right? So even descriptions are just like gone, right? If there's identity intertwined in that, it's important to ask yourself, or can be helpful to ask yourself, what am I hiding from by being fixated with or distracted with precision? Okay, what am I not seeing about myself? What do I don't want to see about myself? So these are the hard questions asked. This is where we start to address the emotion body, right? And often, if we have a fixation in knowledge, logical knowledge, precision, understanding, descriptions, right? Maps, all that stuff, maps of life. When we have an obsession with that, or a fixation in that, we're not that interested in the feels of things. If you could say, people are generally divided in that category, in those categories in a certain way, at least aspects of people. We may not be so interested in, well, what's the other side, right? What is imprecise? What is it, or more importantly, not just what's the opposite, right? Because that's almost logical too. But more importantly, what is it that is literally not subject to that kind of approach? What's not subject to the kind of knowing where you dissect things, describe things, become precise about their nature in description, right? What is it here that I can't actually use that kind of knowing to come in contact with? That's a hard question to ask if you're obsessed with precision, right? Because the mind cannot grasp that. The mind can't do anything with that. And yet there's an answer. Of course there's an answer. It's just like moo. The mind can't even get a toehold in moo. Moo doesn't make a damn bit of sense. You can't start thinking about moo, much less exhaust yourself thinking about it. So it's either you get it or you don't. That's how moo is. So yeah, being willing to say, okay, well, so if you were going to investigate it yourself, for instance, if you said, well, I have the tendency to be like that in some way. I have the tendency to want to really understand things in a precise way. There's a couple ways you could investigate if you want to see what underlying emotions might be playing into that. Okay, one is you can ask yourself, when is it in my life, what situations in my life cause me to want to fixate even more in that way? What areas of my life, which situations do I get into with other people? What kinds of interactions or whatever, or what kind of events in my life cause me to want to really obsess about that kind of stuff, right? That might be a pointer to what the related emotions are to when you might use that to avoid emotion. Another really direct one is it's pretty easy actually, is like, okay, look at the area in your life where you are, you feel like you might be fixating with knowledge, precision, overthinking, over describing, whatever, however that plays out in your life. You can look at that area of your life and ask yourself, what would I feel right now if somebody took all that away from me? I could never do that again. Is that scary? Do you feel like a recoil inside, like, oh shit, well, who am I then without all that? Okay, well, maybe it's an existential crisis underneath that. Or you might feel like some fear or I feel unguarded, I feel vulnerable, right? Well, that's great. That's what you need to feel. You can ask, what am I hiding from myself? What do I not want to feel? What does this help me to avoid? The other thing you can do is just stop doing it for a while, whatever it is. I've told people before who love to read about spirituality and Buddhism and stuff. I've suggested to them, people I've worked with directly, like that have asked this and that, I'll say, don't read for 2 weeks at all, like nothing. Don't read about Buddhism. Don't read about, see how it feels, see what comes up. It might not feel good, but maybe that's what you need to feel, is those emotions that you just have been avoiding by indulging in that stuff too much. So there's a few approaches you can work on, or you can use if you're curious about that or whatever. But yeah, life is not, I love the middle way, right? Life isn't a matter of like reality isn't a matter of extremes, really. But the strange thing is, this is again a paradox, because of course there can be extremes, but there's no fixation in the extreme. There's not wanting to stay in one extreme and never leave that. That's how the mind functions. The mind wants consistency, predictability. But life isn't predictable and it's not consistent. It's just what it is, right? Life is what it is. So yeah, does precision matter? Of course it matters. But guess what? There's also things that are completely and absolutely imprecise. There's things that are clear, extremely clear. There's also muddiness. I'm not afraid of muddiness. If you're afraid of muddiness, but you want clarity or you fixate on clarity, you're missing like a lot, right? You're missing out on a lot of reality. Yeah. If you fixate in precisions and descriptions and talking and communicating, you miss what it's like and what can be experienced when you just completely stop communicating. What if I don't communicate for, like what we're doing right now? We're doing a retreat. We're going to sit in silence for 5 days. Like give yourself an opportunity to know that, to find that. Also, and this is a huge one. I was just saying this to someone the other day. I have a friend who he doesn't come to these talks. He kind of like had an awakening. I met him and then he had an awakening like right away. This very, very nice guy, very heart-based, very sincere. But anyway, he had an awakening and then he didn't really talk to me after. It was kind of interesting. I wondered if he was like kind of avoiding after stuff or whatever, but I don't think so at all. I think he was just so well integrated already and just such a good guy. So he did stay in touch with me and we do touch base every once in a while and things have gone really well for him. But I think just yesterday or the day before I was talking to him or messaging and I said, if I could give almost anybody I know one thing, it would be to stop taking themselves so seriously. So there's this fixation in being serious with yourself, like taking yourself too serious. But I'll tell you what, there's nothing serious about this. Like it's not serious. You've heard of like the jester archetype, right? The joker, jester, clown archetype. Joseph Campbell talked about it. It was really cool. And there's these archetypes in Native American culture, and all the various cultures have these. In the Native Americans, it's the coyote, and I think maybe the raven or crow. But there's all kinds of cool archetypes with this. And if you don't understand that, look at your life. Look at the shit show of your life. I mean, come on, like everybody, seriously. You're kind of a disaster walking around the face of the earth, right? Sometimes. And that's just how it is. Sometimes you got it together and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you convince everyone you got it together, but inside you don't have it together at all, right? Come on, let's be honest. So that's reality, right? There's definitely there's a message from the jester archetype that's threaded through all of this. I mean it literally. That has to balance out that seriousness. It has to balance out that that fixation on what I'm important. Life is important. Peace is important. Whatever. I don't know. Whatever we think is important. Spirituality, all that stuff. It's all fine. It's all good. I don't have a problem with it. But be willing to see where you're fixating. Be willing to see where you don't want to let go. The Shin Ming, it's kind of a long thing, and I've read it here before, I'm sure, and most people here know it. It's called Shin Ming, or it's called Affirming Faith in Mind. And it's written by some old Zen dude hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's one of my favorite pieces of liturgy. It's kind of like a poem, kind of like prose, but he really points to this very well, very clearly. It's beautiful and it's powerful, and it comes from a place of profound, deep, integrated realization. It's beautiful. And so he talks about that in there, the not picking and choosing, right? To the typical human, like having choices is like the best thing in the world, right? I have choices. I can choose this. I can choose that, all this. We don't realize the cost of like convincing ourselves that we're A, in control of everything all the time, and B, have to maintain control of everything all the time. It's exhausting and dysphoric at times, but we don't make because of time, because of our perception of time, we don't make the connection between the times when we feel like we're out of control or trying to be in control and feel like really dysphoric. We don't connect that with the times that we convince that we are in control, and we tell everyone we're in control, and we talk about manifesting everything we want. No, we don't realize those are like causally related in consciousness, right? The Shin Ming points to a very deep stage of realization where let go of that. Let go of your need to pick and choose everything all the time, right? Because why? Because it's already here. It's your experience right here. The experience that is here is already here. By the time your mind is aware of it, by the time you make a thought about it, by the time it's recorded or anything, it's already basically changed into something else, right? So you can't capture reality. You can't make a paradigm about reality. You can't talk about reality. You can't communicate reality, but you can live reality. And it's like, you know, the old phonograph records, the little needle on the groove, it just follows the groove. So follow the groove of reality. Feel into it. Just like we talked at the beginning of this talk, we pointed down into that place of contact, of true, unmitigated intimacy, surrendered intimacy. You can live there for sure. That's it. Ride the groove. It's like riding that groove of life, and whatever comes, whatever is experienced in the moment, that is what is, period. Nothing more, nothing less. Okay. And this very strange, with control specifically, and with choice and all that, this very strange shift happens that I, from the people I know who have clearly been through it, the experience of it is pretty consistent, and it's quite surprising that when you realize you're not in control of life in the way you always wanted to be and thought you were, it seems like you'd be letting go of a lot, but it's very different than that. It's actually much more like everything that there could be is already here, and it's actually making the choice. You're participating in everything as everything without even a you, because there's so much intimacy there, and it's choosing. It's creating reality right here and right now. There's nothing better than that. You're not going to want to go back into the dream world of I'm choosing this for myself because I think it's better for me, and, you know, wrestling with life because whatever life is doing, well, that's not what I really want. I don't really want what's here. I want what I'm imagining could be here later, right? You won't want to go back to that because it's a dream world of separation. So I wouldn't say the choices aren't made. I would just say there's no choice maker. But it can kind of be tricky to think about that. It's not something you can think about. You can only experience it. And there's no hesitation in that kind of choosing. When reality chooses reality as reality is right now, it doesn't hesitate. It just does, period. And it exerts no effort. Just a magnificent display of luminosity, of radiance. That's it. That's what's here. It's not holding on to anything. It's not sticking to anything. There's nothing outside of it. It's the whole universe. So, yeah, we covered a lot of ground. It was a good conversation.
I'm glad the precision part was amplified because that directly ties into what I was talking with Lisa about my tendencies. So yeah, that was great. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, it's you know, on a personal level, and I've told you this before, I've told other people this, but I mean, I can completely relate that, like, in my younger life, I actually remember as a kid, people giving me validation for being intelligent, for how smart I was. I would hear it and I'd be like, oh, they'd be like, you're smart, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm smart. And then I would try to do smart things to get more attention or whatever, right? Like I totally tied my identity around being smart. And also you do realize over time, like you can learning about human nature, understanding people, understanding how to interact with people in certain ways, it can actually protect you. It can keep you out of situations which could be emotionally harmful to you, right? Which of course is just kind of hiding, but if you grew up in an emotionally difficult environment, then that totally makes sense. It makes sense in its own right. Of course you're going to learn to do that, and you're going to use your intelligence to do it, you know. And you can use your intelligence to learn to not depend on anybody. You can use your intelligence to learn to keep people at a distance. You can learn all of it, all that stuff. So we actually build identity around intelligence for very good reasons, based on the conditions in which we evolved, like everyone does, right? We use what's available to us. People do this with anything. If somebody's really funny, I've met a lot of people who are really funny, and but they have a very I don't know how to say it, like distorted, like emotion bodies, like, I guess, you know, not everybody who's funny is like that, but I noticed by getting to know them, I was like, wow, they actually use comedy to control people. If you can get people laughing, they don't hurt you. if you can get people laughing, you can kind of say what you need to say and do what you need to do and get by. And it's, laughter is very disarming. Of course it is. And it's fun. Like, if people like to laugh, right? So if you can get people laughing, you can do the people pleasing thing. You can kind of control them. You can, it's a powerful thing if you're really good at it. So why are you good at it? You just are. It's just the way you were born or whatever. You have that knack. You might actually build that into your identity. Similar to your looks. If you're a physically attractive person, you might use that and you probably will, to some degree, to use it to get what you need and whatever. It's true with any prominent aspect of our personality. We're going to use that to live a safer life, a more productive life, a life where we avoid what we don't want to feel, like all that stuff, right? So intellect is no different. And plus, society really values intelligence and being smart and all that stuff. You kind of get like a certain validation for that, and it's rewarded. And there's nothing wrong with that either. But again, when it comes to identity, everything gets co-opted. Things can get co-opted and usually do. So. I love your smile, Monica. Just smiling away up there.
Yeah, I feel pleasantly befuddled in a way that makes me want to lean into my experience. So
befuddlement is perfect. Yeah. Man. You know what, when I was writing, hey Eschwar, when I was writing that paradox chapter, that was like my favorite chapter in the book to write, because paradoxes by nature are so, they have so much jester energy to them, right? But the thing is, life is so paradoxical. Reality, the closer you're able to look at reality, the closer you're able to just settle into what's real, even beyond all the constructs of mind and self and all that stuff. Like, when you just really settle into what's real, it's just so beautifully paradoxical. It is paradox. It is a paradox. That which is the most precise is also that which is absolutely imprecise. The clearest is the most muddy, right? And that's why the fixations should be addressed if you feel inclined to do it. If you feel an obsession with precision and description and intelligence, that's great. But you might be avoiding the other side of things, and thus filtering your experience somewhat. And when you open to that other side, and then the reality can come into natural balance. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah, it's amazing. When the anchors are pulled, and that yeah. I don't really know how to talk about it, but when you're able to experience without fixation, when you're able to recognize what it is that doesn't ever fixate, what couldn't fixate, you can be both sides at once. There is both sides at once. And there can be one side without the other. And there can be no sides at all. Easily. No problem. Effortlessly. This is paradox, but it's, so when whatever, I was kind of answering Monica's comment, but whatever shifts the lens for you just in a certain way, and you go, oh, that's what I maybe wasn't seeing or whatever, right? Because of a prominent part of your personality or your construct or your makeup, your intelligence, whatever it is. And the lens just shifts a little bit. It's like, oh, I don't have to get rid of intelligence, but I can now see something that was trying to use that intelligence, or something that was holding that as an instrument of survival or whatever. And when I can shift that lens and I start to see, oh, there's something here too that is, it's not that it's unintelligence, it's literally not in the realm of intelligence in the way I understand intelligence. What is that? Like, then there's this kind of wholeness that can just come online. It's like a catalyst, like a chemical catalyst. It sometimes needs, like a couple molecules together needs another couple molecules to come into connect, like a co-catalyst. And when that catalyst comes together, all kinds of realms will open up to you. Things you can't even begin to imagine, truly. That I don't talk about this stuff because I can't talk about it. But that's why what I point to is, well, what might be getting in the way? Where might we be fixating? What is it I'm not maybe wanting to see? And again, approaching all of this not with a kind of taking out the trash approach, not with a sword, but with true curiosity. The curiosity that's actually right here already. It's natural curiosity. It's the curiosity of what is life? What is it to be alive? What is it to sense right now? That kind of curiosity, bring that to these places, these intimate places, especially if it's been really avoided. If there's a lot of hurt there, it's all fine. You have the capacity to do this, but just bring that kind of innocence and curiosity with you. It's gentle. It's curious, gentle, not, don't struggle with yourself. Don't add struggle to the places that already have struggle. Add more of a, bring an understanding with you, and, but a willingness to just, it's kind of a learning, like you're learning a totally new language, not the language of thought, not the language of consciousness even, not the language of anything you've ever picked up in this lifetime. It's like the language of reality itself. It just has a totally different wavelength in a way. And you're not letting go of anything to do this, really. It's a shifting of the lens, and then you'll see that's paradoxical radiance, this intimacy is also letting go. You can't have the letting, you can't, without the radical letting go of this moment, you can't have that radical intimacy. They're just one and the same. Like, as I was saying, you can let go of the mind trying to catch up all the time and just follow the record album groove, like the needle on the record, right? The needle on the phonograph. You just follow the groove, the impulse of life. Now. You follow that, right? But to do that, you have to let go. You have to let go of the last note. Yeah? Again and again and again, right? You don't have to, but reality does let go. And that's what I mean by letting go. You don't have to make letting go a mental thing. It's just that everything is already letting go. Everything is, just as it's coming into being, if it's coming into being at all, it's also disappearing and dissolving. It's display. It's a display of intimate, meaning I can't even tell where it is. It's so close. Radiant. It's a, there's no word for this aspect. Words like luminosity get used, but it's alive. It's aliveness, and it's also without any specific essence. I can look closer. You could say, I can move closer. It can move closer into itself, and there's just more of mystery. It's mysterious. There's nothing really there, and yet it's full. So again, paradox. Get used to it. Get used to paradoxes. Be willing to feel something paradoxical, and know, this is important, know when there's a lot of fixation that gets cleared, or if you do sustained meditation practices, a lot of times that that letting go, that paradox, that plunging into paradox, it will feel like disorientation. That's okay. It will, sometimes it'll feel very disorienting. That's just how this goes sometimes. Very like muddy head. You don't know what's going on. I don't know it just feels confusing, disorienting. That's okay. It's kind of like kicking up a lot of the dirt at the bottom of a pond or something, you know. When you dig deep, when you start to get down to unfiltered reality, the pond can get muddy for a while, but it'll settle back down. It always does. It'll settle, it'll clarify. So just know that sometimes it feels paradoxical and like some wild spiritual journey or mystical experience, and other times it feels muddy. It feels disorienting and confusing, but that's all perfectly okay too. In the same way, you can bring that innocence to the confusion. You can bring that innocence, that natural curiosity. It's not a curiosity of the me that wants to do something with this. I'm not trying to figure out how can I use this, right, for my whatever. It's not like that. It's a natural curiosity. It's a gentle curiosity. It's the dog sniffing the ground. When Cleo runs outside, every time she runs over to the tree and sniffs the tree, and she runs to the light post and sniffs the light post. And I say she's looking at dog social media. It's like she's sniffing the Facebook messages, you know, the other dogs left for her. But it's just so innocent and simple. It's just experience. It's pure sense. And that's that kind of innocent curiosity. And we can have that with our own internal states, even when they're dysphoric, confusing, and they're muddy, whatever. Eschwar, you got anything to say? You don't have to, just in case. I always like hearing stuff you say. You don't have to.
It's you know, in the age that we live with information, I think most people are intellectual, because this whole process is you know, based around wanting to know. So I think, or what I've seen in my experience with this stuff, of breaking it down, is to understand the function of intellect. Most people have a vague understanding of what the intellect is. So if you ask yourself the question, or if I may pose that question to anyone listening right now, is, do you know what the intellect is? And it's either you do or you don't. All right, so the next question is, the intellect is a part of you that says it understands or it doesn't understand. Do you understand? And if you are aware of the understanding, then is that understanding you, if it's separate from your awareness? So now it becomes a tool that you perceive versus something that you identify with. And now you can direct it to do what it does, which is decide, you know, dissect, categorize, labels, and brings information to you, or just brings information. That's just its nature. That's what it does. So when you're aware of the function itself, you get a little break from identifying with that process as being you. And when you get that little break, then you can kind of ease back and just relax a little bit, instead of always having the sense of wanting to know. Knowing is just another aspect of what's going on right now. You know, so I think understanding these functions within ourselves, like precision, is awesome. Directed back towards you, you know, because that's what you're really trying to decipher, what it is that's really here. How are these processes going on? How are they happening? What tools or instruments am I using to dissect, decipher this, that will ultimately, you know, dissolve this sense of me? You know, the identity itself, which is riddled with thoughts, ideas, and concepts. And then once those instruments are used to set those aside, there's this sense that's left. So you no longer use intellect. It's like saying, you know, how can I describe my experience right now without any thoughts? And what are you left with? The fullness of experience. But there's still this sense. So precision goes into that sense. It's no longer about intellect. It's no longer about knowledge or what I know, or, you know, what points me here, what points me there. You're left with this sense that at that point, you have to surrender to that. So it brings you to that point of surrender very precisely, you know. So I think it's everything has its basis. Everything has its place along this journey. Like you can't get from thoughts to sense of without seeing that thoughts or things that are just happening and you're not directly identified with them, right? Once that's seen, letting go is a natural byproduct. There's nothing you have to do to just let go. It's just seeing that process clearly, and you no longer hold to it. That is letting go. It just naturally happens. And then, you know, the movement towards just this sense, you know, this thing that's here that nobody can explain. And really and truly, no one can, because you got to get to that point and then, you know, flip it upside down, tear it open, and then, you know, relax back into it, because it's not something you have to fight. The intellect fights. You know, not seeing that process leads to that identification, so it feels as though you're fighting. You know, so, and it's all subtle, and it's all here, and it's all right now, and it's all in your direct experience, not anybody else's. So reading about it in books, it's a great way to gain information in a mental framework of what you're going to go to try and ascertain what you're going to look for. So you see those pointers and you're like, okay, this is where I'm at. You know, I've read it, this is what it's supposed to look like, but in my actual experience, this is what it looks like. So it's self-confirming, but don't hold true to the books. Don't think that every single book that you're going to read, that you're going to find that answer in the book. It's not that way. So, and it really isn't that serious, like you said. You know, you can have a lot of fun with this. You could also have a lot of pain, misery, and suffering with it as well. It could go whichever way you want. It's kind of like free will. You know, it has to do with your perception of it. If you believe you have control, that's the way the reality starts to mold, as though you have your point of control. But when you see things for what they are, then everything is free to be as it is, and there is no, you know, push and pull. You know, that's when you really see that there is no control. You know, you have to bring everything back to a single point of relation, ignoring everything else to say that I have control. And control really isn't thought. You know, whatever's happening is happening exactly as it's happening. There is no other way it could be unless a thought says it could be a different way, ignoring what actually happened. You know, that's how we refine the way that we're perceiving things in a relative sense. I mean, this world still goes on with, you know, people wanting to run you off the road, whether you get upset at them or not, is not going to change the fact that, you know, whatever happens, happens. You know, so it's fascinating, the intricacy of all of this and how it directly relates with the one that's experiencing this stuff. That's what needs to be, you know, broken down and decipher and taken apart. You know, I love the stuff with emotions and feelings, because those are the things that block. You drive down the road, somebody cuts you off, you get upset, and then you just lose it. You know, and you're gone for a little while. Then you come back and you're like, oh, what the hell just happened? You know, and they're very, very powerful pointers. So emotion work is great. I think it's one of the key things to this. It makes it go quick, because if you have less blocks, the cleaner, clearer, faster you see. You know, so it's pretty cool stuff. I enjoyed the talk itself, because intellectually, you know, everyone talks about intellect, but it's our very, you know, visceral sense of wanting to know. You know, this entire world relatively is based on knowledge. It's even the sense of separation is based on that. I know me here, and there is something over there that either I know or I want to know. You know, but the one that you need to know first is the one here. Once you know that one, everything else will make sense. So, all right.
Awesome. Thanks, man. All right. Just so you know, Eschwar, we started at 11. So if you ever want to watch the video, you don't have to, of course. All right, guys. So we'll see you all next week. It will be noon, and we'll have 3 more of these, at least, starting noon and Sundays. So cool. Thanks for coming, everybody. Nice seeing you.
Awesome.
Nice seeing your faces, and enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy your week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're welcome. Nice meeting you.
Nice to
Thank
meet you
you.
too.
Have a good retreat.
Thank you.